The market break that changes everything. Silver just hit $75 per ounce. And 3 hours ago, China announced a complete ban on all silver exports. Not restrictions, not quotas, not state approval requirements. A total export ban effective immediately. If you own silver, what happens in the next 72 hours will determine whether you capture generational wealth or watch from the sidelines as the biggest commodity squeeze in modern history unfolds. Here's what just happened. Beijing's Ministry of Commerce issued an emergency directive suspending all silver export licenses indefinitely. No exceptions, no grandfather clauses, no transition period. Chinese silver stays in China, period. The announcement sent shockwaves through London's bullion market. Within minutes, spot silver spiked from $71 to $75. Physical premiums exploded to 25% over spot. And futures markets are now showing backwardation for the first time since the Hunt brothers' squeeze in 1980. They are panicking. And I'm going to show you exactly why. Why this ban was always coming. This is not a surprise move if you were paying attention. China tried every other option first, and every option failed catastrophically. Let me take you back 9 months to January 2025. That is when China first placed silver under state trading controls, requiring government approval for all exports. The goal was simple: prioritize domestic supply for their solar panel industry, which produces over 80% of global solar panels and consumes massive amounts of silver. Western analysts thought the controls would hold, that China would carefully manage exports to balance domestic needs with global market stability. They were wrong. By October 2025, just 9 months after implementing controls, China did something that revealed the true depth of the crisis. They exported 660 tons of silver in a single month, the largest export volume on record, more than double their 5-year monthly average. That was not policy success. That was an emergency dump to prevent London's market from seizing up completely. And it failed to bring prices down even $1. The October dump that proved everything. Let me explain what that October 2025 export really meant, because understanding that moment is critical to understanding why we are at $75 today and heading to $150. China dumped 660 tons into London in October because the physical market was experiencing a supply emergency. Buyers were paying massive premiums just to get metal delivered. The London Bullion Market Association, the world's largest over-the-counter precious metals market, was on the verge of a breakdown. According to analysts at Guotai Junan Futures, the crisis stemmed from rising exports to London combined with elevated industrial demand that could not be satisfied from Western sources. London needed silver desperately, and they were willing to pay whatever it took. Shanghai silver had been trading at a 15% premium over London prices for months. That spread more than compensated for China's 13% import tax. Chinese traders were already incentivized to import silver, not export it. But when London offered even higher premiums in October, Beijing had to respond or watch the global pricing mechanism collapse. What nobody understood? At the time, Daniel Ghali, senior commodity strategist at TD Securities, had warned that Chinese imports would drain the free float away from the West. But in October, the flow reversed violently. China became the supplier of last resort. They exported 660 tons, roughly $37 billion worth at October prices. And you know what happened? Silver prices kept climbing. From $48 in October to $52 in November to $66 by December. Think about that. China dumped 21 million ounces into the market, and prices went up 37% over the next 2 months. That told commodity strategists everything they needed to know about the structural deficit. But here is what that October dump really revealed. Something far more terrifying than a temporary supply squeeze. It exposed China's inventory crisis. The stockpile collapse. While China was exporting record amounts, their domestic inventories on the Shanghai Futures Exchange were collapsing, from 3,911 tons in January 2021 to just 780 tons by December 2025. A 75% wipeout in less than 5 years. China was not restricting exports to build reserves. They were restricting exports because they were running out. The October dump was not strategic. It was desperation. They raided their stockpiles to prevent a global market breakdown, knowing full well it would accelerate their own inventory crisis. And now, just 2 months later, they have made the only decision they had left. Shut down all exports completely. Hoard every ounce for domestic industrial survival. The math that forced this decision. Let me show you the arithmetic that left China with no other choice. The numbers that made a complete export ban inevitable. China's silver production in 2024, 3,300 metric tons. China's silver consumption in 2024, 19,000 metric tons. That is a 15,700 ton annual deficit that has to be filled from somewhere. For years, China filled that deficit through imports. They brought in silver from Peru, Mexico, Australia, wherever they could source it. But two things changed in 2025 that made that strategy unsustainable. First, global mine production declined. The Silver Institute reported global production at 823.5 million ounces in 2024, down 0.8% year over year at the exact moment when production needed to be increasing dramatically. Second, global deficits exploded. The 2024 global deficit hit 215.3 million ounces, the second largest in over 20 years. Every major industrial nation was competing for the same shrinking supply. The death spiral accelerates. China could not import enough to cover their deficit, so they drew down stockpiles. Shanghai's visible inventory collapsed from 3,111 tons in early 2021 to 780 tons by December 2025. At their consumption rate of 19,000 tons per year, that is 1,483 tons per month. The 780 tons remaining represented less than 2 weeks of visible supply. And then came the October emergency. They exported 660 tons to save London. That burned through 85% of their visible stockpile in a single month. By November, Shanghai inventories were approaching catastrophic levels. Beijing faced an impossible choice: continue allowing exports and watch domestic supply disappear completely in weeks, or slam the door shut and deal with the global market chaos. They chose survival, and that decision just sent silver to $75. The industrial consumption that cannot stop here is why China cannot simply reduce demand, why their industrial consumption is non-negotiable and will continue accelerating regardless of price. Solar panel production is up 20% in 2024. Each panel requires about 20 grams of silver paste for electrical contacts. With China installing record solar capacity to meet their climate commitments, they need every ounce they can get. Electric vehicle production is exploding. EVs use significantly more silver than traditional vehicles. Power electronics, charging systems, battery management systems all require silver. Data center construction for AI infrastructure is accelerating. Each facility needs substantial silver for electrical components and high-frequency connections. China cannot turn off any of these sectors. Their economic growth depends on solar exports. Their industrial policy depends on EV dominance. Their technology leadership depends on AI infrastructure. So when stockpiles hit critical levels, they had only one option: ban all exports and secure every available ounce for domestic use. The panic response happening right now. Let me show you what is happening in global markets right now. The panic cascade that started the moment China announced the ban. London premiums exploded to 25% over spot within minutes of the announcement. That means buyers are willing to pay $93.75 per ounce for physical metal when paper contracts are trading at $75. That is not normal market behavior. That is panic. New York dealers are reporting delivery delays stretching to 4 to 6 weeks. Normally, it is 2 to 3 days. The physical supply chain is seizing up in real time. Shanghai futures are showing backwardation. Near-term contracts are trading higher than longer-dated contracts. That only happens when immediate physical demand exceeds available supply. The last time silver showed sustained backwardation was 1980 during the Hunt brothers squeeze, the institutional scramble. But here is where it gets really interesting. The panic is not coming from retail investors or small traders. It is coming from the institutions who understand exactly what this ban means. JP Morgan, which paid a $920 million settlement in 2020 for silver market manipulation, has been accumulating physical silver for years. They know the supply dynamics better than anyone, and they are not selling at $75. Central banks are diversifying into silver alongside gold. After buying over 1,000 metric tons of gold for 3 consecutive years, sovereign wealth funds are recognizing that silver offers the same monetary hedge with even more explosive upside. Industrial buyers are panic bidding for supply. Solar manufacturers, electronics producers, anyone who needs silver to keep production lines running is trying to lock in contracts before prices go even higher. And hedge funds are scrambling to cover short positions before the squeeze intensifies. The short interest in silver futures is substantial, and with China removing 3,000 to 4,000 tons per year from the global market, those shorts are about to get obliterated. The supply chain breakdown here is what China's ban actually does to the global supply chain. The second-order effects that are just beginning to materialize: London's bullion market loses access to 3,000 to 4,000 tons per year. That is roughly 15% of annual mine production that just disappeared from the global free float. India, which imported 2,600 tons in just September and October 2025, loses a major supply source. Much of that silver came through Hong Kong from China. That flow just stopped dead. Switzerland's refineries, which process and redistribute silver globally, lose a critical input source. Their throughput will decline, tightening supply even further. And the United States, which imports significant silver for industrial applications, faces higher prices and longer delivery times as the remaining supply gets bid up aggressively. This is not a temporary disruption that resolves in weeks or months. This is a structural break in the global supply chain that fundamentally alters the market. Why this cannot be walked back? Some analysts are suggesting China will reverse this ban once markets stabilize, that this is a temporary measure to rebuild stockpiles. They are wrong. Let me explain why. First, China tried the measured approach. They implemented state trading controls in January 2025. That was supposed to give them flexibility to manage exports while protecting domestic supply. It failed within 9 months. Second, they tried the emergency intervention. The October dump of 660 tons was meant to relieve pressure and restore market function. It failed completely. Prices kept climbing. Third, their stockpiles are effectively exhausted. With only 780 tons visible inventory as of December 2025, and consumption running at around 583 tons per month, they have no buffer left. Every ounce they export now directly threatens domestic industrial production. The rare earth precedent China has done this before, and we know exactly how it plays out. In 2010, China controlled 97% of global rare earth production. They implemented export quotas to dominate the market and secure strategic advantage. Rare earth prices exploded. The global supply chain restructured at enormous cost. Western countries launched desperate efforts to develop alternative sources. It took over a decade for non-Chinese rare earth production to scale up enough to reduce dependence, and prices never returned to pre-quota levels. Silver is following the exact same script, except this time, the crisis is more severe because silver cannot be easily substituted. The substitution problem. Rare earths had alternatives for some applications. Engineers found workarounds. Silver does not have that luxury. Silver has the highest electrical conductivity of any metal, period, no exceptions. For high-frequency electronics and solar panels, there is no substitute that maintains performance. Silver has the highest thermal conductivity of any metal, period. For advanced electronics and industrial applications where heat dissipation is critical, nothing else works, silver has unique antimicrobial properties that are irreplaceable in medical applications. Bandages, catheters, surgical instruments all depend on silver's ability to prevent infection. You cannot use copper in solar panels. It oxidizes and kills efficiency by 20 to 30%. You cannot use aluminum in high-frequency electronics. Resistance is too high and devices fail. You cannot use substitutes in critical medical devices. People die. This is why China's ban is so devastating, and why prices are heading much higher than $75. The global bidding war. With China out of the export market, everyone else has to compete for a shrinking pool of supply. Peru, Mexico, and other producing nations will export to whoever pays the most. And right now, that bidding war is just beginning. India needs 7,000 to 8,000 tons annually for industrial use and retail investment. The United States needs 5,000 to 6,000 tons for electronics, solar, and industrial applications. Europe needs 4,000 to 5,000 tons for manufacturing and green energy. Add it all up, and global demand outside China is roughly 20,000 to 25,000 tons annually. But global mine production is only about 25,000 tons, and China was contributing 3,300 tons of that. With China hoarding their domestic production, the rest of the world is competing for maybe 22,000 tons to meet 25,000 tons of demand. That math does not work, and the only way to balance it is through price. The price discovery mechanism. Breaking down, let me explain what is happening to price discovery right now. Why the normal mechanisms that keep markets orderly are failing. In a normal commodity market, futures prices guide physical prices. Traders use paper contracts to hedge and speculate, and arbitrage keeps futures and physical prices aligned. But that system only works when there is enough physical supply to satisfy delivery demands. When physical supply gets tight, the paper market loses its connection to reality. We are watching that happen right now. Silver futures are trading at $75, but physical premiums are 25% higher. That 25% spread tells you the paper price is meaningless. It is not reflecting the true cost of securing actual metal. The paper market illusion. The COMEX, the primary futures exchange for silver, holds about 300 million ounces in registered inventory available for delivery. That sounds like a lot until you realize it represents less than 4 months of global industrial demand. And here's the critical detail most traders miss. Most of that inventory is not actually available. It is already owned, already allocated, already committed. The truly free-floating supply available for immediate delivery is a fraction of the reported number. China's export ban just removed another 100 million ounces per year from potential COMEX inflows. That metal was never going to show up in New York warehouses anyway, but the market was pricing in the possibility. Now that possibility is gone. As physical supply tightens further, futures traders will face an impossible choice: take delivery and drain remaining COMEX inventory, triggering a supply crisis, or settle in cash and watch physical premiums explode even higher. Either path leads to the same destination: much higher prices. The historical comparison. In 1979 to 1980, silver went from $6 to $50 in 12 months. 733% gain driven by the Hunt brothers attempting to corner the market. But that was manipulation. This is mathematics. The Hunt brothers were accumulating silver to create artificial scarcity. Regulators eventually stopped them by changing margin requirements and forcing liquidation. What is happening now cannot be stopped by regulators. China is not manipulating the market. They are securing strategic resources for industrial survival. No regulator can force a sovereign nation to export commodities they need domestically. And the structural deficit is real. 6 consecutive years of global deficits totaling over 1 billion ounces. Mine production declining when it needs to be increasing. Industrial demand accelerating across solar, EVs, and data centers. The 1980s squeeze ended when the Hunt brothers were forced to sell. The squeeze ends when prices rise high enough to destroy industrial demand or when new mine production comes online. And new mines take 7 to 10 years to develop. The path to $150 and beyond. Let me show you exactly how silver gets to $150, the specific mechanism and timeline. We are at $75 today, with China's export ban just announced. Physical premiums are at 25%, putting real acquisition cost near $94. That is our starting point. Over the next 30 to 60 days, the market fully digests what China's ban actually means. Manufacturers realize they cannot secure supply at current prices. Industrial buyers start panic bidding. Silver hits $95 to $100 as the first wave of demand destruction fails to materialize. By Q2 2026, COMEX inventory starts declining noticeably as traders take delivery rather than roll contracts. Registered silver drops below 200 million ounces. Backwardation intensifies. Silver hits $110 to $120. By Q3 2026, the first major industrial supply disruptions hit. Solar manufacturers in Europe and the US face production delays. Electronics producers in Asia struggle to secure feedstock. The media coverage intensifies. Retail investors pile in. Silver hits $130 to $140. And by Q4 2026, we are testing $150 as the gold to silver ratio compresses from 65.1 today toward historical crisis levels of 40.1 to 51, the gold-silver ratio compression. This is the single most powerful force that will drive silver higher over the next 12 months. Gold is currently around $2,850 per ounce. Silver is at $75. That is a ratio of 38.1, already compressed from the 65.1 we saw earlier this year. But in genuine crisis periods, that ratio compresses much further. In 2011, it hit 32.1. In 1980, it hit 17.1. In 1979, before the Hunt brothers squeeze, it was 42.1. If gold holds current levels around $2,150 and the ratio compresses to 35.1, silver should be at $81. If the ratio hits 31, silver should be at $95. If the ratio hits 25.1 in a genuine supply panic, silver should be at $114. But here's the critical insight. Gold is not holding current levels. Gold is also rising as central banks diversify and geopolitical tensions escalate. If gold rises to $200 per ounce, which is entirely possible given U.S. debt concerns and monetary instability, and the silver ratio hits 25.1, silver trades at $128. If gold reaches $3,500 and the ratio compresses to 23.1 during peak panic, silver hits $152. These are not fantasy numbers. These are mathematical outcomes based on historical precedent and structural supply deficits. What could stop this? Let me be honest about the risks. What could prevent silver from reaching $150? First, demand destruction at higher prices. If silver hits $120, some industrial applications might find substitutes or reduce consumption. But as I explained earlier, substitution is extremely limited for silver's critical uses. Second, a global recession that crushes industrial demand. If economies contract sharply, solar installations decline, EV production slows, and data center buildouts pause. But even in recession, silver has monetary safe haven characteristics that support prices. Third, a policy reversal from China. If Beijing decides to restart exports to generate foreign exchange, but given their stockpile crisis and domestic consumption needs, this seems highly unlikely. None of these risks eliminate the structural deficit. They might slow the price advance temporarily, but they do not change the fundamental math. What to watch and how to position. Here are the specific indicators you need to monitor over the next 90 days. The data points that will tell you if this thesis is playing out as expected. First, watch COMEX registered inventory. It should be declining steadily as traders take delivery. If registered silver drops below 200 million ounces, the physical squeeze is intensifying exactly as predicted. Second, watch physical premiums in London, New York, and Shanghai. They are at 25% today. If they expand to 30% or higher, the paper market is losing control completely. Third, watch Chinese import data. If China starts importing even more aggressively despite the export ban, it confirms their stockpile crisis is worse than visible inventory suggests. Fourth, watch solar and EV production data. If output declines or supply chain disruptions emerge in Q2 2026, it validates the industrial supply shortage thesis. And fifth, watch the gold-silver ratio. If it compresses below 35:1, we are in the early stages of a genuine supply panic. The positioning opportunity. The institutional players are already positioned. JP Morgan accumulated during the manipulation years before their settlement. Central banks are diversifying into precious metals. Hedge funds are building long positions. Retail investors are just starting to understand what China's export ban actually means. Most people heard the news, but have not done the math on what happens when 15% of global supply disappears from the market. That is your opportunity. The window between institutional positioning and mass retail awareness. That window is measured in weeks, not months. Silver at $75 is not expensive when you understand the destination. It is not overvalued when you run the numbers on structural deficits and supply removal. It is actually cheap relative to where it needs to go to balance this market. The final warning. China tried restrictions. They failed. China tried emergency exports. They failed. Now China has banned all exports, and that is the final card they can play. There is no policy tool left, no strategic reserve to deploy, no compromised position that satisfies both domestic industrial needs and global market stability. The math is simple. The consequences are not. Shanghai's visible stockpile, effectively exhausted. Global deficit, 6 consecutive years and accelerating. Chinese exports, 0 permanently. Time remaining before major supply disruptions, months. Silver hit $75 today on the news. It is heading to $95 within 60 days. It is targeting $120 by Q3 of 2026, and it is likely to test $150 by year-end 2026. The only question is whether you position before the crowd figures out what the institutions already know, that this is not a temporary spike, this is a structural break in the global silver market, and the reset is going to be violent. The panic is real. The math is irrefutable. The opportunity is closing.